Hello and good day everyone. Welcome to my channel Fixing Knowledge. And today we are talking about top 10 famous speeches that changed the world. So let's begin. I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King Jr. in 1963. I Have a Dream is one of the most iconic and powerful speeches in American history, delivered during the protest rally in Washington on 20th August 1963. King delivered the speech to over 250,000 civil rights supporters gathered at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., calling for racial equality and an end to discrimination against African Americans. It came at the height of the civil rights movement, a century after Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves. King's speech is renowned for its powerful rhetoric, including the use of anaphora, I have a dream repeated, allusions to the Declaration of Independence and Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and vivid metaphors. The most famous part is his I have a dream refrain, where he described his vision of a future where people will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. He called for civil and economic rights and end to racism, and for black and white children to be able to join hands as sisters and brothers. The speech was a defining moment of the civil rights movement, as is considered among the greatest speeches in American history. It inspired and galvanized the civil rights movement, leading to the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. King's powerful oratory and metaphors made the speech one of the most quoted and memorable in history, cementing his status as one of the most influential Americans. In summary, I Have a Dream was a pivotal moment that gave powerful voice to the struggle for racial equality through King's masterful and inspiring rhetoric that still resonates today. We Shall Fight on the Beaches by Winston Churchill in 1940. Winston Churchill's We Shall Fight on the Beaches speech, delivered to the House of Commons on 4th of June 1940, is one of the most famous speeches of World War II. In it, Churchill rallied the British people in the face of the evacuation of Allied troops from Dunkirk and the fall of France to Nazi Germany. The speech begins by acknowledging the military disaster of Dunkirk, but Churchill warns that we must be very careful not to assign to this deliverance the attributes of a victory. He then declares that Britain will fight on, saying, we shall fight on the seas and oceans. We shall fight with growing confidence and growing strength in the air. We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. Churchill famously repeats the phrase, we shall fight on the beaches several times, vowing that Britain will never surrender, even if this island or a large part of it were subjugated and starving. He expresses confidence that the British Empire and the United States will ultimately rescue and liberate Europe from Nazi tyranny. The speech is considered a masterpiece of rhetoric, with Churchill's complex use of language, repetition, and metaphor helping to immortalize it in popular memory. It is seen as a key moment in rallying British morale and resolve during the darkest days of the war. Inaugural Address by John F. Kennedy in 1961. John F. Kennedy's inaugural address on 20th January 1961 is considered one of the most powerful and influential speeches in American history. The 1366-word speech, written primarily by Kennedy with input from speechwriter Ted Sorensen, laid out the key themes and goals of his presidency during a time of economic prosperity and emerging social changes. The speech began with a call to public service, urging Americans to ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. This line, which entered the national vocabulary, encapsulated Kennedy's belief in civic duty and participation. Kennedy also laid out an expansive foreign policy vision for the Cold War era, declaring, "Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty." He highlighted the dangers of nuclear weapons and the need to help the underprivileged around the world. Other memorable lines included, "Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike, that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. And if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich." The speech was delivered to a television audience, the first in color, and is considered one of the best inaugural addresses in history. Quit India by Mahatma Gandhi in 1942. Mahatma Gandhi delivered his famous Quit India speech on 8th of August 1942 at the Gowalia Tank Maidan in Mumbai, calling for Indian independence from British rule. In the speech, Gandhi urged the British to leave India immediately, saying, "There is a mantra, short one, that I give you. You imprint it on your heart and let every breath of yours give an expression to it. The mantra is do or die." The speech came shortly before the launch of the Quit India movement, a civil disobedience campaign organized by the Indian National Congress Party under Gandhi's leadership. The movement aimed to force the British to grant Indian independence by engaging in non-violent resistance and mass protest. Gandhi's address, delivered first in Hindi and then in English, called for unity among India's diverse religious and ethnic groups in the struggle for freedom. He emphasized the need for non-violent protest, saying that previous violent revolutions like the French and Russian revolutions had failed to achieve true democracy. Within 24 hours of the speech, Gandhi and most of the Congress leadership were arrested by the British authorities. This led to widespread riot and protest across India that were brutally suppressed by the government. Despite the repression, the Quit India movement galvanized the Indian independence struggle and brought the goal of Swaraj closer to realization. Ain't I a Woman by Sojourner Truth in 1851. Sojourner Truth delivered her famous speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" at the Women's Right Convention in Akron, Ohio on 29th May 1851. The speech was a powerful argument for women's rights, particularly for black women who faced both racial and gender discrimination. There are two main versions of the speech. Both versions emphasize Truth's argument that as a woman who has worked hard, borne children, and endured hardship, she deserves the same rights as any other woman, regardless of race. The speech was a powerful statement against the intersectional oppression faced by black women in 19th century America. Version 1. The original 1851 version, transcribed by journalist Marius Robinson, who attended the convention, was published in the anti-slavery Bugle newspaper shortly after. In this version, Truth questions why women's rights are denied to her, saying, "I am a woman's rights," and pointing out her physical strength and labor. Version 2, or more widely known 1863 version, published 12 years later by Francis Dana Gage, contains the famous repeated phrase, "Ain't I a woman?" This version, which some argue falsely attributes a southern slave dialect to Truth, has Truth explaining, "Look at me, look at my arm. I have plucked and planted and gathered into barns, and no man could head me," and questioning why she is not afforded the same courtesies as white women. The struggle for human rights. by Eleanor Roosevelt in 1948. In her 1948 speech, The Struggle for Human Rights, delivered in Paris, Eleanor Roosevelt passionately advocated for the preservation of individual freedoms and the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the United Nations. Roosevelt defined basic human rights as freedom of speech and a free press, freedom of religion and worship, freedom of assembly and the right of petition, the right of men to be secure in their homes and free from unreasonable search and seizure and from arbitrary arrest and punishment. She emphasized that these freedoms are not just abstract ideals, but tools with which we create a way of life in which we can enjoy freedom. As a chair of the UN's Human Rights Commission, Roosevelt played a key role in drafting the Universal Declaration of Human Rights over the course of 2 years. She believed the declaration could push the world away from war by establishing basic standards to guide the UN in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights. In her speech, Roosevelt urged UN member states to support the declaration, warning against the forces of reaction that seek to prostitute the great words of a free tradition and thereby to confuse the struggle. She argued that the basic problem confronting the world was preserving individual freedom, a battle as decisive then as during the French and American revolutions. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was ultimately adopted by the UN General Assembly on 10th of December 1948, with 48 nations voting in favor and 8 abstaining. Roosevelt's tireless efforts as chair of the drafting committee were instrumental in this historic achievement. The Gettysburg Address by Abraham Lincoln in 1863. Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, delivered on 19 November 1863 at the dedication of the Soldiers' National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, is one of the most famous speeches in American history. In just 272 words, Lincoln expressively tied the Civil War to the founding principles of the United States, stating that the nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Lincoln praised the sacrifices of those who died at Gettysburg, saying, "The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract." He urged the living to be dedicated to the unfinished work of ensuring that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Despite its brevity, the Gettysburg Address has been widely praised as one of the greatest speeches ever given. Senator Charles Sumner called it a monumental act and said the battle itself was less important than the speech. Historian George Bancroft requested a copy from Lincoln to use as a fundraiser for soldiers. While there are 5 known manuscripts of the speech in Lincoln's hand, the exact wording is disputed. The speech has been carved into the walls of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and is considered one of the most powerful statements of freedom and liberty in any language. Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat by Winston Churchill in 1940. Winston Churchill's famous Blood, Toil, Tears and Sweat speech was delivered to the House of Commons on 13 May 1940, shortly after he became the Prime Minister. In this speech, Churchill asked for the House confidence in his new government and outlined his policy to wage war against Nazi Germany with all our might and with all the strength that God can give us. The phrase blood, toil, tears and sweat had been used by Churchill and others before, but it became particularly famous in this speech. Churchill told the House, "I have nothing to offer but blood, toil, tears and sweat," and warned of many long months of struggle and of suffering. However, he expressed confidence that with the nation's united resolve, victory will be achieved at all cost. Victory in spite of all terror. Victory, however long and hard the road may be. The speech was a defining moment in Churchill's leadership and helped rally the nation in the face of the looming threat of Nazi invasion. While the Conservative reaction was initially lukewarm, the Labour Party's response was heartwarming. Churchill's defiant words and unwavering determination to fight on despite the immense challenges ahead inspired the British people in the darkest days of World War II. The Truman Doctrine by Harry S. Truman in 1947. The Truman Doctrine speech delivered by President Harry S. Truman on 12 March 1947 was a pivotal moment in the earlier Cold War era. Here are key points from the speech. Request for aid. Truman asked Congress for $400 million in military and economic assistance for Turkey and Greece to counter the spread of communism. Containment policy. The speech marked a significant shift in US foreign policy as Truman committed the United States to actively supporting anti-communist forces globally, a policy known as containment. Two ways of life. Truman contrasted the democracy way of life, characterized by free institutions, representative government, and individual liberties, with the totalitarian regime marked by minority rule, terror, and suppression of freedoms. Support for free peoples. Truman emphasized that the United States must support free peoples resisting subjugation by armed minorities or outside pressures, as the spread of autocracy would undermine international peace and US security. Global implications. Truman warned that if the United States failed to aid Greece and Turkey, the consequences would be far-reaching, potentially leading to the collapse of free institutions and the loss of independence for other nations. Historical context. The speech was prompted by the British government's announcement that it would no longer provide military and economic assistance to Greece, and the US government's concern about Soviet influence in the region. Impact. The Truman Doctrine effectively ended US isolation and marked the beginning of a long period of active US involvement in international affairs to counter the spread of communism. The Ballot or the Bullet by Malcolm X in 1964. In his 1964 speech, The Ballot or the Bullet, Malcolm X urged African Americans to exercise their right to vote, but warned that if the government continued to prevent them from attaining full equality, it might be necessary to take up arms. The speech was delivered on two occasions: 3rd of April in 1964 at the Corey Church in Cleveland, Ohio, and 12th of April in 1964 at the King Baptist Church in Detroit, Michigan. Malcolm X has recently separated from the Nation of Islam, a black nationalist religious organization he had been the spokesperson for nearly a decade. He now declared his willingness to cooperate with the civil rights movement, which advocated for integration and against segregation in contrast to the Nation of Islam's separatist stance. The speech came out at a critical time as President Lyndon B. Johnson was running for re-election in 1964 and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which banned discrimination based on race, religion, sex, or national origin in jobs and public accommodations, was being considered by Congress. Malcolm X emphasized the importance of voting, stating, "The ballot is more important than the dollar." However, he also accused the government of failing African Americans and engaging in a conspiracy to deprive them of their rights. In the speech, Malcolm X broadened his rhetoric to appeal to a wider audience beyond the Nation of Islam while maintaining his characteristic use of repetition and vivid imagery. He declared 1964 the year of the ballot or the bullet and asserted that African Americans must take their case to the criminal government in Washington, D.C. and the world. Thank you for giving your time and learning with me on my channel, Fixing Knowledge. Stay tuned to see more learnings coming soon, and don't forget to like and subscribe my channel. Have a nice day ahead. Bye bye.